I'll just give a few more minutes. Start. For those here, please help yourself to cross buttons. Sorry for those online. You can just imagine all the hot cross buns we have in the office here. Yes. So, James, you got greetings from Chris Lonsdale. Well done. Well done.
Yeah.
Thanks for joining us, Chris.
That's all right, Ricky. Happy to be here. Good luck, Anum.
Thank you.
All right, so we have a quorum. So we'll start the ball rolling. So, of course, it's traditional to knowledge capturing as we pass through. So today I'd like to acknowledge the traditional owners and custodians of the lands and waterways here on each and every campus of ACU. Today we're on the lands of the Camaraga people. And pay our respect to elders, past, present, and future, for their continuing knowledge shared throughout the ages. All right, so welcome everybody today. So we have a final year review for Anum today, who present very shortly. So I'd like to introduce her supervisory team, consisting of Deputy Provost Professor Chris Lonsdale, Dr. Renata Sinelli, Associate Professor Michael Novotel, and Mr. James Boyer as well, who are led by the most capable Associate Professor Taryn Sanders. And also today, the final year review panel is made up of Professor Joseph Sirocci, Professor Amanda Telford, who is also led by the most competent and most excellent Professor Therese Dickey as chair. So without any further ado, Anu, I'll hand over to you. Thank you.
Can we have it as a slideshow or will
Yeah, just press and go. Is there
does not seem to be working?
I'll go forward.
I'm just gonna back. Like, can I have it in the form of a slideshow or would it?
The people won't see it, but yeah.
Oh, okay. Makes sense. All good. Yeah. All right, let's get started. Hello, everyone, and good afternoon. Thank you very much for being a part of my final year review. For those of you who have attended my CUC and MCL, I always narrate a personal relevance to this topic, which is that I'm an aunt to 5 beautiful nephews and 5 beautiful nieces. And my observation about their physical activity is that my nephews tend to be more physically active than my nieces. Hence the rationale and motivation for this research. And I think by now I may have gotten an answer to this question, that why is it so and how to make my nieces more physically active as well. Okay, so the overview of today's presentation is that I'll first provide a brief background on physical activity research, followed by a background on Delphi and policy research, which ties well to the second and third studies of my PhD. And then I'll delve deeper into every PhD study. Physical inactivity is a global crisis. Although physical activity is associated with numerous health benefits, according to the World Health Organization, children and adolescents aged 11 to 17 years do not meet the recommended guidelines of physical activity, with girls being less physically active than boys. What can be done to increase the physical activity of girls? Well, schools provide a promising avenue in this regard because children and adolescents, they spend most of their daily time in schools. However, existing research evidence regarding the effectiveness of school-based physical activity interventions is mixed. with latest research telling us that these interventions tend to favor boys more than girls. Well, what can be done then to make these interventions equally effective for girls and boys? I think rather than keep focusing our efforts on answering the question about the overall effectiveness of these interventions, because we already have an answer to this question, we need to focus our attention on what is it about these interventions, about their content and the strategies used in these interventions that is making them more or less effective for girls and boys. This is the background for the first study of my PhD, which is a systematic review. Now, relying solely on existing evidence may be problematic, particularly when there is limited knowledge, when there is lack of certainty around evidence, and when there is a lack of agreement amongst researchers. Hence the rationale for my second PhD study to ask experts about what they think can be done to increase the physical activity of girls. And finally, it is imperative to know whether the existing policies, they align with the research evidence gathered through studies 1 and 2 to determine their effectiveness for girls. Hence the rationale for the final study of my PhD, which is a policy analysis. Let's now delve deeper into each study, starting with the systematic review, for which the research questions are: which strategies of school-based physical activity interventions are most effective in improving health and health behaviors, namely moderate to vigorous physical activity, physical fitness, body mass index, and sedentary time among school-aged children and adolescents? Specifically, which strategies are most effective for girls and which are most effective for boys? So I followed the PRISMA guidelines, and my review is based upon an existing Cochrane review. However, my review is an extension of the review because the original review, number one, they did not do any gender analysis. And number two, they did a macro level analysis talking about just the broader 4 types or components of the physical activity interventions. So after updated screening, 42 studies made it to my review, with 29 coming from the original review and 13 coming from updated screening and having reported gender data. I want to draw your attention particularly towards the data extraction. So individual intervention strategies were coded verbatim for each study, and then the similar strategies were grouped together into themes, and similar themes were grouped together according to the 5 components of the comprehensive school physical activity program framework, which I'm following in my thesis. Based upon the thematic analysis, 52 strategies were identified, again, falling under the 5 components of the CSVAB framework, and I used vote counting method for the quantitative synthesis. So this is a snapshot of the results. So if you look here, so these are basically the strategies falling under the 5 components of the CSVAB framework. And then these are the outcomes, and you can see that whether those strategies are effective for girls only, which is the magenta color, boys only, the blue color, the green color, which is effective for both girls and boys, red, not effective, and gray is when a particular strategy was not reported against an outcome in the study. So what I'm going to do now, in the best interests of time, I'll present the strategies that I found were effective for both girls and boys across outcomes, if that was applicable to more than one outcome, and for individual outcomes as well. Now, for increasing fitness and decreasing sedentary time, the strategies that were effective for both girls and boys were specialist PE teachers, physical activity during recess, use of classroom energizers, and family and school newsletters. For the strategies in fact, it's just one strategy that was effective in increasing MBPA and fitness. It was the teachers' access to online resources. Now, for the individual outcomes, so for MBPA, the strategies that were effective for both genders were physical activity policy, teachers maximizing movement in their lessons and having access to resources, and the use of competence and relatedness principles of STT. For improving fitness, the effective strategies were increasing the duration of the physical education lessons, classroom energizers, active playgrounds, parents' involvement in homework, developing school and community links, and parent events. For decreasing BMI, effective strategies were high-intensity interval training sessions for students and access to the project's application or website. And finally, for decreasing sedentary time, effective strategies were active playgrounds, physically active academic lessons, physically active homework, active transportation, and family newsletters. If I wrap up this study, so although there were no consistent patterns of strategies seen across the outcomes, the study still made a contribution to the existing literature by identifying the effective strategies and sets the stage for future researchers to actually use more advanced analysis to answer the question of interest. It can also help school educators to incorporate these strategies into their daily practice and for the policymakers to ensure that these strategies are reflected in the policies. All right, moving on to study 2, which is basically a Delphi study. And the research question was that what strategies do experts think are effective or important to increase the physical activity of girls in primary and secondary schools? Excuse me. And again, these strategies were along the 5 components of the CSBAE framework. So Delphi method was used with open-ended and closed-ended questions. To begin with, there were 69 participants belonging to 3 categories, so academics and researchers, school educators, PE teachers and school principals, and government representatives from the departments of education, health, and sport. In Delphi Survey 1, experts were asked to write in the text boxes their responses about what do they think are the promising strategies to increase girls' physical activity. And there were 5 questions, 1 for each component of the CSBAE framework. So after doing a thematic analysis of their responses, 84 strategies emerged, again, which were falling under the 5 components of the framework. In the Delphi Survey 2, experts were asked to express their agreement or disagreement regarding the importance of each strategy that was identified in Delphi Survey 1, and they did that along a Likert rating scale of 8. And the third Delphi survey was to settle any discrepancies and build a consensus. Now, based upon Delphi Survey 2 and 3, I will present the strategies that reached consensus across all participant categories, and it will be done along the dimensions of the CSBAE framework. So for the first component, PE component, there were 7 strategies. Please ignore this, the number. It is just that 84 strategies. So out of those 84 strategies, what was the number of the strategy? So for the PE, or the physical education component of the CSBAE framework, 7 strategies reached consensus across all participant categories, which comprised of active uniform, focus on fun, having active female role models, focus on increasing girls' competence, and a focus on multiple learning outcomes, providing girls with specific facilities, and using non-gendered language. For the second component, physical activity during school, 6 strategies reached consensus, which included providing equipment for physical activity, giving girls leadership roles, providing girls with safe spaces, giving girls a voice in the design of physical activity, excuse me, offering lifelong physical activities and challenging gender stereotypes that exist related to physical activity. For the third component, physical activity before or after school, 3 strategies reached consensus. So offering facilities to be physically active, providing equal opportunities to everyone, and focus on socialization. For the fourth component, staff involvement, 3 strategies reached consensus. So having active, positive role models, professional development of teachers, and giving staff access to resources. And finally, for the family and community engagement, there was only 1 strategy that reached consensus across all participant categories, and it was partnership between school and community clubs. So if I wrap the study up, although this Delphi study did help in identifying strategies that are not much prevalent in the existing literature, for example, focus on fun and socialization and not on competition and giving girls a voice in the design of physical activity, it does get a bit tricky because with the 84 strategies, so the question is that how to incorporate those strategies and how to operationalize them when translating them into school-based physical activity interventions. And although there were the strengths of each study, which goes without saying, I do want to point out a limitation here that it could be because of a limitation that is inherent in the method of Delphi procedure, which is that even for the non-consensus factors, the participants rated them as important or very important. So if participants are rating everything as important or very important, regardless of whether they have a consensus or not, the question is whether they were differentiating amongst the strategies well enough to be able to answer the question. So these 2 studies have been completed, and I will now talk about the final study of my PhD, which is a policy analysis, and it is in progress. So the research questions for the policy analysis is, first, do the existing school-related physical activity policies, whether they align with the evidence that is gathered through studies 1 and 2, and how can schools and governments either modify existing policies or introduce new policies to help in increasing the physical activity of girls? So I'm following the CAPA framework for this policy analysis, which basically has 6 aspects with further components. I'm only doing auditing, which is basically determining whether a policy has an effective strategy identified through study 1 or 2. How are we defining school-related physical activity policies? So the policies that are existing at the national as well as the state or territory level with either a direct relevance to the school setting, they may be first-order policies, or an indirect relevance, so in the form of second-order policies. What I've done so far is that I have basically filtered policy relevant strategies from the first 2 studies by first listing down all the effective strategies from study 1. Secondly, all the strategies that reached consensus across all participant categories in study 2. Number 3, combining strategies that were similar, then identifying policy relevant strategies, and eventually translating those strategies into policy language. So right now I'm searching the websites of the government departments, after which I'll also contact them to retrieve the policy documents. Now, the initial plan was to produce something like an Australian physical activity report card, which actually assigns grades along certain criteria So the initial plan was to do something like a physical activity report card, but instead of having the grades, have a categorical rating that whether a strategy is reflected in the policy or not. But after having a conversation with a potential collaborator for this project, we will do more qualitative synthesis and discourse analysis to determine the intent that may be in the policy documents and their language to infer whether the strategies are reflected in the policy document or not. Now, in summary, I think the systematic review and the Delphi study and the policy analysis, they are an effort to increase the physical activity of schoolgirls. And broadly speaking, they address the UN Sustainable Development Goals, which include but are not limited to gender equity and quality education. Now, before I end up my presentation, I want to thank my supervision team and my heartfelt gratitude to my primary supervisor, Taryn. I think I've never seen a person as patient and tolerant as him, because soon after the commencement of my PhD, after my COC, I developed an ongoing medical condition. And so there were times when I did not show up for the meeting without any notice, or there was a very short notice, but he was very supportive, very cooperative. And I just want to convey this thing to him that that did help me in sailing through my journey in a smooth way. So thank you very much. And that does bring me to the end of the presentation as well. So happy to answer any questions now. Thank you very much.
Round of applause, thank you. Thank you very much, Anum. So Teresa, can I hand over to you as chair to lead the Q&A? Thank you.
Thank you, Anum. A great structured presentation. Thank you for that. And I don't really agree with the Taryn comments, but okay. My first question to you is, you've identified a very large number of strategies there, more than 80. And I was thinking of how would you recommend schools should prioritize these strategies, especially if resources are limited. So let's say you meet a school principal and you have to give them a very brief gist of your thesis and what you would recommend. What would that be?
Okay, so I'm still working on it, and it is a very good question. What I have in my mind is that I will group these strategies somehow. So rather than saying that, okay, and obviously I'm not going to mention that, okay, this is the first component of this ESBAP framework and this is what you can do. So I'm going to do grouping. So let's say if there is something that is related to teachers, so it could incorporate that, okay, you need to provide them with training, you need to provide them with access to resources. Similarly, if it's if it's related to students or the girls, then there will be grouping that you need to give them a voice in the design of physical activity. Well, that's for intervention, but then if they have concerns that, their needs should be met and there should be gender segregation in terms of facilities. So I'm going to do a grouping. And as I said, that I'm in the process of doing that. So it's not going to come from each component of the framework. That was for how I structured my thesis, but it's going to come in the form of groupings that, okay, this is something that can be done from the student's perspective. This is something that can be done for the teachers, and then so on and so forth.
Okay, thank you. And following up from that question, just one more. What do you think, I know you're going to discuss this later in the study when you work on your discussion, but what, very simply put, were the main differences between what the systematic review found in terms of which strategies are super effective for girls and what the experts found?
Yeah, so there were a lot of similarities, but I think what I particularly found out were that things that may be difficult to operationalize. So they were in the responses, particularly of the school educators, that they were talking a lot about, like include girls in the design of interventions, have gender segregated facilities, focus on socialization and not competition and fun. So I think, as I said, that there were similarities, but things that are more, that may be unique to the perspectives of the girls. I think that's where I found the difference. And also there was a notable thing that although research tells us, existing evidence tells us that family involvement is imperative, there was not a lot of consensus in that, particularly the academics. They were not in this favor that, okay, involving parents in the, let's say, in completing the homework. So I think that's where I found some differences or some unique perspectives coming from the experts.
Okay, great, thank you. So I'll now open for the assessors first before opening for everybody. And Joseph, your hand was up first.
Yes, thank you. Excellent work. Just fantastic. Very clear, I guess, through line. Can you guys hear me okay?
Yeah.
No echo? I just have a few questions. So just looking at your meta-analysis, and then then you did this intensive thing with experts. Did you see anything missing in current research, like strategies that the experts identified that hasn't been researched yet?
Yes, I think it's partly related to what Teresa asked earlier. So I think, and that's why I keep saying this, that these strategies, it's a bit tricky that how you can operationalize them in the interventions. And if you're saying this thing that, okay, we need to focus upon fun and socialization and not competition, then how will you translate that into an intervention strategy? And there were some strategies. For example, there are a couple of interventions which do give girls a voice in designing their physical activity, but then what does that actually mean? How can you operationalize that? How can that actually be translated into an intervention strategy? So I think, I'm not sure what the appropriate term is here, but I think something that's very subjective, that's there in the Delphi findings. But then the question around how to translate that into a research, maybe I will need to do a postdoc for that.
Yeah. Okay, my last two questions are just about the your final study. How are you, I just was curious, this is simple, and how are you systematically searching websites for policies?
Yeah, so I'm using, first of all, the search function, and in the search function, typing different terms, like starting with physical activity policy, and then anything that's related to physical activity, let's say, ban on electronic devices in schools, because that will come under the second order policy. So that's how I'm doing it. And then whatever I'm coming up with, because I've just started this process, so it is time consuming because I'll need to go through that list, and then I'll need to look at the document to determine, okay, whether it is actually talking about the physical activity policy or not. So starting with that search function, if it is coming up with options, going through those documents, and if not, then contacting the departments through the potential collaborator as well, and then my end user supervisor as well.
So is it a sample of all of Australia, or is it specific to your end user?
No. So it's Australia-wise, like this strategy. Yeah.
Yeah. So do you think that one search term will get everything? Are you looking at everything, like a local school district in Perth? What is their policy? Or
yeah, so I will contact the schools as well. And so for that, we have certain options that we have, like the PE teachers groups on LinkedIn, for example, so we can approach them, introduce so that's how we are doing that.
Okay, yeah. Okay, I guess that has to be a systematic review.
Yeah.
as you know. Excellent. Okay, just one more question. When you get all these documents, I didn't see anything about how you plan to analyze them, and I was just wondering if you're going to use like try and make use of AI or topic and modeling and those kinds of digital methods that might make your life a little easier.
Yes. So that is actually in our mind to do that as well. And I think we'll be using the qualitative software in Vivo as well. And so we will load all documents into it and then providing it with the terms, how it works in that. And then it can highlight those terms to make our lives easier, obviously, as well. That, okay, so this is the content that's related to physical activity and then going to the analysis from there.
Yeah, I mean, you can also do like thematic analysis and things like that with AI now. I'm sure Taryn is aware of that. It's pretty impressive. Yeah, just thoughts. But that's fine. That's all I have to ask. But well done, a really thorough and clear thesis. So I see you've done a ton of work, and congratulations. Yeah, looks great.
Thank you so much.
Thanks, Joseph. Also, I think NVivo is now AI powered, so you can.
Oh, nice. Okay.
Yeah. Amanda, you're up next.
Thanks, Teresa. I just want to echo Joseph's comments there. Great work, Anum. A huge body of work. I can see a massive volume of work across those areas. I've got a couple of questions, and I know you've sort of pointed out some of your constraints and further thinking needs to happen, but I'm just interested in terms of the policy work you did.
Yeah.
Even at this point, despite you've identified a lot of the policies are quite non-specific, how do you think you could guide, or your research could certainly inform policymakers in relation to sort of more effective physical activity policies in relation to girls? Have you got sort of some thoughts there?
I do have a cursory idea about that, which is that if you look at the policy documents, many of them are not thorough. So they are using, let's say they're talking about meeting the minimum physical activity guidelines. So let's say the 150 minutes. And then they are not thorough. Obviously, the thorough analysis will come when I actually do the thematic analysis. But if you just have like a bird's eye view, you get to know that they're talking about very surface level things. And then the detailed things are missing in that. That's why when I said that we are not just doing like a categorical yes or no report card thing, we are delving deeper into that and we are focusing upon the intent as well. So I think that's where we will be able to identify that, okay, this is what the systematic review and the Delphi told us. This is the analysis that we did. Now, is that being reflected in the policy or not? And so in terms of then helping the policymakers, and that's the second research question of my policy analysis, that we will then have the recommendations to the policymakers that, okay, this is missing and this is how, or this is what you can actually incorporate in your policies, and recommendations around how you can do that as well.
And can you expand on that in terms of sort of a systems level, who you would talk to about these suggestions?
So
operationalize that?
So I think it will be reflected in like the discussion section and then the journal article following from that. But in terms of, I think we do have so James is here, like he is the end user supervisor. So if there is any other way of making it more succinct and clear to the departments, I think I would love to explore that opportunity to make it more concrete and operationalized for them as well. Like in, for example, a policy narrative kind of a thing.
I have an additional question. I noticed I haven't moved enough because my lights have gone out. The other question, I guess, is from my perspective with my initial teacher education hat on is, have you given any thought to the implications of your findings in relation to informing teacher education? Now, that actually could be not beyond initial teacher education and also be in-service teachers, not just pre-service teachers in terms of their professional learning? What sort of things around, you know, ensuring that they're thinking about effective strategies for girls would you recommend from your findings?
I think that's a very good question. And I would say that particularly the things that are related to teachers that I identify that, okay, like there should be a professional development, and then how they can best incorporate those strategies in their teaching, number one. And number two, how they can coordinate or communicate with the girls about that. For example, if they are using non-gendered language, if they are communicating with them in a way that is, you know, like challenging the gender stereotypes that are related to physical activity. So I think that's how, you know, like we can train teachers in not just in terms of communication with them, which then offers, you know, like motivation to the girls through being role models, but also in terms of their training, that how they can incorporate those strategies in their teaching as well.
Thanks, Anum.
Thank
I'll
you.
hand back over to Teresa now.
Thank you very
Well
much.
done.
And I'll open to everyone for questions, and hope Ricky you will help me in monitoring face-to-face people, as I cannot see them.
All right.
That's the presentation, and it was really clear. I feel like my question feel a little bit similar and the other, you know, questions, but still I want to listen your answer. So your recently published and question is basically how to increase girls' participation to the physical activity.
Yeah.
Then can you explain how can we increase the girls' PE participation based on your findings?
Okay. Again, like good question. And as I said with the other questions as well, that this is something that I'm working upon, you know, like in synthesizing this information. But in simple words, if I just talk about the physical activity, I would say I'll just list a few strategies for you. That if you give girls autonomy in designing the physical activities, if you ask them what kind of activities do they want to engage in, what are their interests, and then what is coming from here is that if you are focusing upon fun and socialization more than competition, if you are offering gender-specific facilities to girls, for example, give them change rooms, give them lockers where they can leave their stuff and they are comfortable in the change rooms. So these are some of the strategies that can be done, because you are then not just increasing their motivation by addressing or meeting their needs. You are indirectly having a positive influence on their physical education or on their physical activity. Yeah.
There's a number of studies in the bullying area that have looked at school policies or broader school policies, and the finding is this, and then they looked at the amount of bullying that's in that school, and the correlation was zero.
So what did you say? What did they look at?
They looked at the quality of anti-bullying policy.
Yeah.
And then they looked at the amount of bullying in the school, and there was zero correlation between the quality of the policy statement and what actually happened. And that seems to have some implications with what you're talking about.
Yeah. That's a good one. And I think the other thing is that as a researcher, I can evaluate a policy, I can propose, but then how much that gets implemented that is, I think that is a question for all of us to consider, that who is going to ensure that that policy does get implemented. Policies implemented, like the existing policies being implemented. I'll jot this point down and I'll think about it, because we are not talking about how much is being implemented. We're just talking about what is in the policy. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
And that's not to say that you have a good policy is important.
Yeah.
And so perhaps you can build in as part of your recommendations, some sort of monitoring. So that there's a link between behavior and the policy.
Yeah.
The extent to which they're implemented and they're effective.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a good suggestion. Thank you.
Questions here? Yes, John Marshall.
A really big picture question. There wasn't, like, you didn't collect the original data throughout the dissertation of your own that you could evaluate if you're on the right track, or your, like hypothesis is correct or wrong. So I'd like you just to react is that it feels like a descriptive dissertation. React to that whether you agree or not. And is there any way that you built in some kind of check throughout your scholarly process that could tell you you're wrong, that you're in the wrong direction?
Okay, so two things. First is this, that I think I did not just take the findings from another study. So for example, in Delphi, the data was coming from the experts, but then I was the one who was analyzing it. And then the second one, I think everything was done in duplicate and in consensus with the supervision team. So for example, when the thematic analysis was done, it was sent to the supervision team to see whether, like there were any disagreements. Same was the case with the thematic analysis of the Delphi study. So I think there were checks, and even with the policy analysis as well, like it will be done in duplicate. So it's not just that the data is coming, I'm analyzing it, and descriptively it's going there in the thesis. Does that make sense?
Oh, that's a follow up. So I think the point of study 3 was to come up with a report card. So I give the report card to the principal, and the principal says, "That's your opinion."
That's what, sorry?
That's your opinion.
Yeah.
Is there any way you can answer that? That it's more than an opinion. It's.
Yeah, I would say that, okay, it's my opinion, but then that opinion is based upon the published documents. So I did not make anything up out of, like, in the air. It was like, so let's say I say that, okay, as a research, as a search, I come across 68 documents. So I think, because they are publicly available as well, so I can make links to those documents that it is what is reflected in these documents. And I did an analysis of those documents. So I did not make anything up, because it's coming from the documents that are already existing in the literature.
Thank you. If I can, sorry, I need to interrupt just because of the time, because some people in the panel need to leave at 1:30. So I'd encourage you to continue this discussion offline, which it's an interesting one, but while the panel needs to go back and discuss because of the time constraints of this meeting. Thank you.
Thank you, Teresa. So we'll wrap this up. So please can you give another round of applause for Anum? Thank you very much. Thank you, everyone. So can I just ask the review panel and the HDR panel to stay online? And Taryn's here live. You're going to just boardroom. It's pretty good to go. Thank you, everybody online. Thank you here. Please, for those of you who are here, continue the cross buns and converse of Anum. Thanks very much, everyone. And thank you, everybody online.